the Jewish tradition, it seemed appropriate when we were planning services for this year to spend a Sunday looking at wisdom that's been gained in the last few decades that have pointed to some mistranslations in the scriptures. So our reading today comes actually also from the 13th century, like our opening words. This is from Jalaluddin Rumi. It's called I'm Not Persian. He writes, Muslims, what can I do? I've lost my identity. I'm not a Christian, Jew, pagan, or Muslim. I'm neither an Easterner nor a Westerner, neither a land nor sea person. Nature can't fully account for me, nor can the whirling cosmos. I don't exclusively belong to earth, water, fire, or air. I'm not of the invisible, ineffable, nor of the dust. I'm not a process or a being. I'm not of this world or the next, and deserve neither eternal reward nor eternal punishment. I'm not of Adam or Eve, not of the original garden nor the final one. My home has no address. My tracks leave no trace. I am neither body nor soul. What can I say? I belong to the self of the beloved. And then in a tone very similar to the words of Jesus, Rumi goes on to say, I have laid all twos aside. This world and that world are one. I search for one, I recognize one. I see one clearly, and I call the name of the one. That unnameable one, the breath of the breath, is the first and last, the outside and the inside. We are fortunate to live in an unprecedented time in human history. In recent decades, the Dalai Lama left Tibet, bringing the wisdom of his tradition to the whole world. Vatican II opened vast stores of knowledge gathered over centuries by the Roman Catholic Church. Discoveries of sacred texts, such as the Nag Hammadi texts, have shed new light on the early Christian era. Through these opportunities, the human family can now examine manuscripts that were previously seen only by a few. The human family is now able to take a new look at the original words of prophets and saints from different religious traditions. In doing this, we've come to see that some of our understandings of particular passages of Scripture that are sacred in the Jewish and Christian faiths hold some historically incorrect translations. Rather than shaking their faith, these new insights give many faithful believers a deeper meaning to their faith, even as it gives believers a greater responsibility to look critically at what we have traditionally learned. These new understandings can help people discern a faithful way to approach Scripture. Dr. Bart Ehrman writes, people need to use their intelligence to evaluate what they find to be true and untrue in the Bible. This is how we need to live life generally. Everything we hear and see, we need to evaluate. Whether the inspiring words of the Bible or the inspiring writings of Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, or George Eliot, of Gandhi, Desmond Tutu, or the Dalai Lama. When we engage with this invitation to look with discerning eyes at religious texts. We find both deep wisdom and errors brought on by multiple layers of translation. So what does this new exploration of sacred texts mean for Unitarian Universalists? Along with leaders of various faith traditions, many Unitarian Universalists are returning to historical data to sift through centuries and, in some cases, millennia of history to discern the essence of the original teachings. For many of us, these new discoveries help us re-engage with the teachings of Jesus. So whatever our personal history with our faith traditions of origin, we must acknowledge that despite the misuse of religion over the millennia, the wisdom, comfort, and inspiration found in Hebrew and Christian scriptures have transformed the lives of millions and millions as those people found meaning and a sustaining faith within biblical scripture. Yet we also know that to understand some sacred texts more deeply and to get at the heart of the meaning, we need to look at mistranslations and acknowledge that they have caused great damage over the centuries. So this morning I'd like for us to look briefly at 3 egregious mistranslations. And if at the end of the day you wish to pursue study of these items, I'll be happy to recommend additional readings. So I'm sure by now you've noticed the insert in your bulletin. The painting on the front with the Hebrew text is actually a painting by a Sufi friend of mine from Phoenix based on Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. The other side offers both the King James translation of this verse as well as a transliteration or midrash of the text. In Genesis, what we learned that it said was that God gives man dominion over the earth and her creatures and the right to subdue the earth. Hebrew, being a very different language than the ones into which the scriptures are translated, deals with prepositions in a very different manner than Latin or Greek. We never think about the power of prepositions. Maybe Carol does. So over the centuries, the drive to conquer the earth, lands, and peoples has been justified by the use of the simple preposition over rather than with. And I'm sorry, in a couple of places I'm going to get a little technical, but it's really important. Dr. Neil Douglas Klotz, in some technical notes about the translation of this text, writes in his book, Desert Wisdom, the phrase, and you'll see the last 2 words, uredu be, usually translates and have dominion over. Yet it clearly states in the Hebrew, have dominion with, or have dominion alongside. There is no evidence for the Hebrew or the Semitic preposition be, the letter beth, meaning over in the sense of ruling over. This seems to have been simply assumed when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Western languages, Greek and Latin, by those aligned to imperial Christianity, which was established by Constantine. The And this is the most important sentence. Maybe I should stop after this one, but I've got two more errors to look at. He writes, the ecological and human damage historically by the ignorant and deliberate misunderstanding of this point cannot be overestimated. So in looking at this text with new eyes, we find that the Holy One created the world to be in harmony with all beings. In translating this text into Western languages, the assumption was that human beings have the right to take what they want. Sadly, this mistranslation has been the justification for ecological devastation, genocide, and slavery. Thankfully, many mainstream Christian traditions are now claiming this new meaning. Many Christians and Jews, as well as Unitarian Universalists, seek to educate people about this mistranslation that has justified incredible damage in the name of conquering the earth. So it's important for us to take every opportunity we can find to help change the minds of those who still seek to destroy nature rather than live in harmony with nature in all her forms. Another mistranslation that has been profoundly damaging to our Jewish sisters and brothers is seen most strongly in the Gospel of John. We find in the Gospel story the implication that the Jews killed Jesus. In the Gospels, it says that the gathered crowd yelled to Pilate to crucify Jesus. To get some sense of how this misguided notion of Scripture could have happened, let us remember that the Gospels were written under the influence and pressure of the Roman occupation of Judea and much of the Middle East. Pilate was the Roman in charge of and accustomed to handing out death sentences. The word used in translations until the last few years speaks of the Jews turning Jesus over to the Romans for death, yet in reality, it was the people who lived in that land, the Judeans, not the Jewish people. The University of Missouri School of Law seems like an unlikely place to find a quote for a sermon, has done research on famous trials in history, and their report says this: Pilate was a powerful figure. If he had reservations about killing Jesus, he certainly would have taken him back to Caesarea for trial, or referred his case back to the Sanhedrin for possible punishment under Jewish, not Roman law. The fact that he did not says that Pilate was pleased to crucify Jesus. The fact of crucifixion establishes that Jesus was executed as an offender of Roman law. Had his punishment been a violation of Jewish law, for example, blasphemy, Jesus would have been stoned, the punishment prescribed under Jewish law. So let me state that again. If Jewish law had condemned Jesus, he would have been taken in front of the Sanhedrin and stoned to death. Crucifixion was a Roman punishment, not a Jewish punishment. John 18:31 clearly states Jewish leadership saying it is illegal for us, meaning the Jews, to condemn a Jewish prisoner. During the Second Vatican Council, which met from 1962 to 1965, the Roman Catholic Church officially admitted the error in the assumption that the Jews had Jesus killed when it issued a declaration repudiating the belief in the collective Jewish guilt for the crucifixion of Jesus. How much death and loss of life, including the Holocaust, has occurred over centuries because of this misuse of language. Like the mistranslation in Genesis, we see that mistranslations that have become institutionalized are difficult to change, especially when the errors are by those seeking power and control. The third misunderstanding that I want us to consider occurred when the original Christian texts written in the Semitic language of Aramaic were translated into Greek. For Greeks, as I think I've talked about before, God was far off in the heavens somewhere. For the Semitic people of the Middle East who spoke Aramaic as their primary language, I don't know what happened. Huh? Oh. I don't know. Okay, who spoke Aramaic. God was as close as our breath and could be seen in the wonders of nature in all of creation. These are two profoundly different ways of seeing the world. Either God is completely removed from us, or God is as close as our breath. So when Jesus speaks the phrase, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and other I am sayings, he's speaking as a Jewish prophet who understands the world from a Semitic worldview. He knew that the Holy One is present in his heart, body, and soul. His view of reality was that God is present in every heart, yours and mine. Each of us is part of a sacred unity. In the Hebrew scripture, after being called to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt, Moses asks, "Who shall I say sent me?" The Holy One responds, "Tell them I am has sent me," or "I am who I am has sent me." So when we see Jesus speaking the phrases that begin with the words "I am," he is referring back to the Holy One, to God. Jesus said, "Ina na, I am," meaning I am immersed in the Holy One. My being is part of the I am of the universe. My little self is part of the big I am. Or another way of saying that might be, I am the clearest reflection in this lifetime of the one who has sent me. Jesus was completely immersed in the reality of God. He understood that his individual self was indeed part of that sacred unity. The I that is my person is part of the holy I. Jesus also understood that every person is born in original blessing and that each of us has within us that sacred connection to the universal I am. We see this message when Jesus speaks to his disciples, saying that when they come to see and follow the Holy One, who Jesus reflects in his life and words, they will be able to do all these things that Jesus has done and more. Neil Douglas Clausen in writings on the I am statements of Jesus says, in the Aramaic subtext of Jesus' I am statements, we can see the native Middle Eastern approach to the question of individuality. If everything is linked in communion with the Holy One, and this is the basic notion expressed in the Hebrew Scripture, why do we have individuality? And how does our individuality serve the universe's unfolding? In the Aramaic expression, Jesus here uses ina, na. We have literally the I and the I, or the I of I. Gets a little tongue twisty there. This statement expresses a deep connection between one's individual self and the only self, or God. Here, Jesus is affirming that we too have the potential to be in union with the Holy One. When we choose to explore our lives, to work and live in harmony with all creation, and when we live and breathe as Jesus taught, then we can find peace and harmony in our lives so that we can, like Jesus, help manifest love in the world. We understand that we too are part of the I am of the universe. Whether we are followers of Jesus or not, when we seek to understand the deeper message of these texts, our experience of life can be profoundly enriched. When we learn more about the authentic meaning of these scriptures, then hopefully we will find new ways to understand how to live in the world and how perhaps to release old prejudices so that we can live with greater harmony with all people. When we consider the dangers that exist when misunderstandings of Scripture are held as gospel by a couple of billion people in the world, we know that these beliefs will shape the world that Alice and our other children will inherit. As committed and caring people, we want to make sure the world is a better place, to protect our fragile earth and those who are oppressed. We also seek to find deeper meaning for our own lives. So it behooves us to have a clearer understanding of what these texts really mean, so that damage to the earth and her inhabitants no longer occurs. As we live out our ethics and values, we seek to shape the world for good. Theodore Parker, one of our forebears, the great Universalist preacher and abolitionist, wrote, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." Parker has been dead for 150 years, but the arc of the moral universe still bends. It is now our task to seek the truth and to make sure we help the arc of the moral universe continue to bend toward greater understanding and toward justice. I invite us now to rise in body or spirit as we